Yeah, I mean, if you're into beating dead horses, then it's pretty good. So this is issue 1 of Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars Battleworld. It's one of 4 issues. Looks like they're using their 40-year anniversary to try to get more money out of something that got them tons and tons of money 40 years ago. I don't normally buy this kind of thing, but honestly, I just really liked this variant cover by Ryan Stegman. Great artist, great dude, I met him a couple times. He's super cool. This is the original that he's referencing. One of the first comics I ever bought myself. You can tell he's got all the poses right. He's got the weird little Iron Man hands out front, doing nothing in particular. The Hulk is doing a flying V. Classic Mike Zeck art on the original. So I really only bought it because of the cover. I didn't have high expectations going into it. And then I found out that Tom DeFalco was writing it. And if you don't know Tom DeFalco, he wrote a lot of classic Spider-Man stuff from the mid-80s. And he's been writing this whole time, but most of his noteworthy stuff was Spider-Man related content in the 80s, which is exactly what I like to read. So right off the bat, it's classic Spider-Man monologuing. He's making jokes, he's jumping around, he's throwing webs. You know, he's doing classic Spidey stuff. DeFalco makes a point to have a wolf attacking Spider-Man, and then when Spider-Man knocks down a frost giant, and it looks like the frost giant is going to fall on top of the wolf, he goes, "Oh no, I gotta save the wolf," which is classic Spider-Man. You know, he's a nice guy. They give us a flashback to the original series, of course, and what's really cool about the flashback is that they're saying that these 4 issues that are going to come out took place between panels 4 and 5 on page 36 of issue 12. It's pretty specific. I've always loved it when in comics, especially in the 80s, in Marvel comics, they would say, Thor showed up in this issue of Spider-Man specifically before issue 356 of his own series, or something like that. So you know that it's all one world, and it's all connected, and the characters are around even though they're dealing with their own stuff. So I like it when they say this happens at this specific time in the chronology of the Marvel Universe. Great. Classic. Go to work, DeFalco. And he really is honest to the way that Spider-Man used to talk in the comics. We have him referencing MC Escher, and Spider-Man is supposed to be a nerd. So it's nice that he's talking about nerdy stuff, like MC Escher, while he's flying around in space. It's just good attention to detail of a character. One of the characters that felt off in this issue was the Human Torch. At this point in Marvel chronology, Spider-Man and the Human Torch were not great buddies. They had a lot of feuding going on, and they didn't hate each other. You know, in the 60s, they hated each other. Super mean to each other. But by the 80s, they'd cooled out a little bit. They just didn't really like each other. But Human Torch shows up, blames Spider-Man for the situation they're in, which is ridiculous, but it's a common trope. People show up and start fights for reasons that aren't very good in comics. It's just a thing. But in particular, Spider-Man is being attacked by somebody, and the Human Torch is watching, and he says, "You deserve to strangle." That's pretty dark. That is over the line, Johnny. So that felt a little weird. But then that moment is followed up by Human Torch making a quick little nod to the new costume that Spider-Man's wearing. Throws fire at the costume, and the symbiote, which they don't know is a symbiote yet, the symbiote doesn't like fire, so it recoils. And the Human Torch is like, "Did your costume just..." Nah. And then we forget about it. It doesn't come up again. So it's a good little nod. Keeps us in perspective. So throughout the issue, Spider-Man's monologues are all classic and well done. It's not too over the top, at least not any more over the top than it ever has been. When the characters finally just start getting along, it's fine. A couple villains show up, and now they gotta fight the villains, and nobody knows what's going on, and it's very confusing for everybody. Overall, it feels like a classic Marvel comic. There's a lot of action, and I don't need to see action in comics all that much. I know it's Marvel, and they feel like they should have people fist fighting all the time. I don't feel the need to see a lot of fist fighting anymore in my comics. But, you know, if that's the formula that's worked for them for this long, then I guess keep beating that horse. There were a couple things I didn't love about the plot in general. First of all, I don't know who has control over this, but the premise is a little thin. They have other Beyonders saying, "Hey, you know what? The experiment is actually pretty good. Sucks that the Beyonder is not very good at running experiments. Let's do it ourselves." And then it's not even really clear what they want from Spider-Man. They're just like, "Throw some villains at him. See what he does." It feels like just another excuse to go back to 1984. I love 1984, but a thin excuse is a thin excuse. The other problem I had with it was at the very end, the stakes that they lay out for Spider-Man are too high. They're way too high. If he fails, we will reach through time, space, and the multiverse to effect complete erasure. It will be as if he and his whole species never existed. We know that doesn't happen. These stakes are ridiculous. We know that he's not gonna fail. So right away, I have no doubt in my mind he's gonna succeed, so it takes all the drama out of it. They also say, will he be inspired to succeed or crushed by such overwhelming responsibility? It's Spider-Man. He loves responsibility. He loves it. No doubt in my mind what the outcome of this story is gonna be. He's gonna win. If the stakes had been lower, like, we're gonna cut off his arm and replace it with a robot arm that he doesn't know he has. At least that would be more interesting than, we're gonna wipe everybody out. So it was a great classic storyline. Didn't love the stakes. The whole reason we're here seems kind of thin, but I enjoyed myself while it lasted. The artist is really good at drawing Spider-Man in his black costume. Really good at that. And the frost giant that he draws look classic. Very circa 1980s. Wolves, on the other hand. Wolves are not his specialty. The artist is Pat Olliffe. Olliffe? He's an established artist. He's been around for a while. And it looks like he's trying to do a very 80s style. At some points, it almost looks like he's trying to do a early John Romita Jr. style, which was right around the same time Tom DeFalco was writing Spider-Man. So it would be very appropriate to be imitating that style for this story. But one of the signature moves of early John Romita Jr. art was lots and lots of lines that don't show any real detail. Like, look at this bug. Look at this giant bug thing. There's a bunch of lines all over this bug, everywhere, that don't translate into detail. They're supposed to be translating into form, I think is what he's going for here. And you definitely get form. That is a bug made of rectangles, but no detail. So the line economy is skewed. Another thing John Romita Jr. does that's happening here is teeny tiny eyeballs, way too far forward, mouths that look like that. I don't know how to describe that. That's just a John Romita Jr. thing. Big, thick lines on things that are up front, but no real detail. You would see more detail if it was closer to you. So maybe he was going for J.R. Jr. style, which is definitely a style. I hate it, but it's a style. I think the biggest thing holding back the art is the colorist. Not that the colorist is bad, this is pretty good coloring for modern color. But in a comic like this, where they're resting so heavily on nostalgia and on classic storytelling, almost vintage-looking art, classic tone of writing, modern coloring just doesn't fit. You can't bring old comics into the now with modern coloring and have them keep that same magic that they had. It's like when they take an old comic and reprint it in a new graphic novel version, like this, and they try to redo all the coloring to make it brighter and nicer. But really, what you just get is this flat art that's too bright and has no character to it, versus the original art, which may be a little bit darker, but the imperfections of the printing, the way that coloring worked back then, had so much more character and life and texture to it, and this just ends up looking silly. So in this issue, you've got 80s style writing and 80s style art, and then modern coloring on top, and it just feels disjointed. I wish it had classic style coloring. I know they don't really do that anymore, and I know that there's people who try to do that and end up looking more like Roy Lichtenstein drawings, which is pop art, which is a reference to comic art and not really the source material that I'm talking about. But it's very hard to do actual classic comic coloring authentically, because a lot of it was just that the technology they had at the time wasn't very good, so they had to plan for the imperfections. Anyway, the art as a whole is okay if it's referencing what I think it's referencing. Don't love the coloring, but it's not the colorist's fault. It's just the way comics work now. A couple other things I noticed about the art. Look at his hand. Look at his hand there. You thought we wouldn't notice that? Did you just stop drawing details to connect his wrist to his hand? You thought we wouldn't notice. That fist breaks the immersion for me so fast. And in general, a thing that a lot of comic artists are doing lately that's a pet peeve of mine is their lines don't look committed. They have scratchy lines. And this is really hard to see. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it. But like this line here, he couldn't just commit to one line. There's like a whisper line next to the real line, and it just makes it look sketchy. Or on Spider-Man's face here, there's whisper lines on the outline of his head right next to the real lines. Just choose a line. Used to be, the guy who would go through and ink it would have to basically have a degree in calligraphy, and they would just do these gorgeous, purposeful lines with varying thickness, and they'd have to do it right the first time, because you don't get any more tries. So inking used to be a real work of art. And I feel like a lot of modern comic illustrators just don't put that much effort into inking. And I know this is Marvel and it's a machine and you gotta get work out fast and you gotta get artists who work fast, which is stupid because I want to see more comics drawn by Steve McNiven. But overall, that issue felt a little rushed, quick cash grab, classic, but if I really want to get that classic feeling, I'm just going to go back and read Tom DeFalco's actual Spider-Man comics from the 80s. So I'm giving issue 1 of Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars Battleworld a 6 out of 10, which is pretty much what I expected. Didn't love it, wasn't trash. 6 out of 10. What do you think? Today's question comes from that annoying guy who lives down the hall from your dorm. And he asks, who would win in a fight, Superman or the Hulk? Well, if you go by the DC versus Marvel crossover from the 90s, Superman. That was easy.